Hey friend, please subscribe. 1 second for you. Big deal for me. He had that kind of posture that told me everything before the file did, the kind of hunched shoulders and tilted head that silently shouted "Don't try me," like a warning without words. I'd seen that posture before, mostly when I was a teenager and I used to catch my reflection in cracked mirrors after school fights, the stance of someone already bracing for the next hit because the world didn't offer them breaks. I was 54 at the time, still sitting in the city's IT department, working as a systems analyst, the type of job where no one remembers your birthday but they panic when a dashboard takes 3 seconds too long to load. I liked that life because it was clean, controlled, predictable. That day wasn't predictable. Janelle walked in, her file thin like an insult, and sat across from me in a conference room that smelled like Lysol wipes and cold coffee. She wore no-nonsense clothes and spoke in no-nonsense sentences. Kellen, she said, 15, quiet, reads non-fiction, keeps to himself. She looked at me with eyes that said she had seen too many people ignore her words, and then added, he reacts hard to unfairness. She said it like it was a side effect, something tested and proven, something ignored until it mattered. I nodded, pretending I understood, though I only wanted to look like I didn't need more convincing. Group homes haven't worked? I asked. She answered, 2 this year. No violence. Just shuts down. 1 fight at school. Someone made a psych ward joke. He swung. Didn't explain. Just clammed up. I didn't flinch. I told her I was adopted. That gave her pause, the first real pause, like she'd heard 100 excuses but not one with weight. I added, I don't scare easy. I tapped the file. She said, unknown father, mother with mental health history. She let it sit in the air like a stone before adding, this is a Tuesday. I half smiled and replied, city gets potholes. Teenagers get bad days. I can triage both. For the first time she smirked, not friendly, but approving, like I had just passed the test. She slid the photo across the table. It was black and white, too dark, a photocopy with edges blurred, but even through the grain I saw the boy, dark hair half covering his eyes, jaw set like he already hated the camera. She's his mom? I asked. Ely, Janelle corrected. He carries her picture everywhere. Like it's a passport. That line hit me harder than I showed. I asked what she needed from me right now. She said, a bed, a door he can close, and a grown man who doesn't bail the first time he tests you. I nodded and said, done. I signed all the forms, each one heavier than the last being a release of information stapled to a contact sheet. School liaison. Social worker. A 24-hour crisis number I hoped I wouldn't need. Janelle stood to leave. Tomorrow at 4 o'clock, she said. He'll have 1 duffel and the photo at the door. Then she added, if you ever need to talk to someone who's been in your shoes, your brother Miles, the psychologist. He'd understand the terrain. My jaw clenched at the mention. We hadn't spoken much lately. I nodded like I would call but didn't say the words. When she left, I stared at the copy of the kid's face until the room felt colder, then tucked it under my arm and went home. The next day, I readied the spare room. Mattress flipped, sheets washed, lamp working. Not perfect, but ready. I left the door open, that part mattered. The next afternoon he arrived. 1 duffel, 1 photo. His eyes didn't meet mine, but they scanned the walls like he was measuring the space for exits. He put the photo on the nightstand, right side, under the lamp, precise in its angle. For 4 nights it didn't move. I never touched it, not even to dust. It looked worn, edges soft like fabric, folds like scars, the kind of wear that comes from being held, not stored. He glanced at it, brushing his teeth, elbows locked, toothbrush barely moving. Afterward, he always placed it gently back on the quilt, almost like someone might accuse him of stealing it if it wasn't visible. We didn't talk that first week. My words were small. You good with soup? Need laundry instructions? His answers were nods or whispers, barely above air. Never rude, just sealed. Words rationed like currency he couldn't trust. I understood. At 12, in my third foster home, I'd done the same. Play mute so no one knows where to poke. The only one he let in was Biscuit. My old dog, smarter than most caseworkers. She followed him like she'd been waiting for him her whole life. When he sat, she curled beside him. When he walked, her tail tapped the floor like Morse code. She started sleeping outside his door, and I never told her to move. The second Thursday it snapped. I was washing dishes when I heard a drawer slam, then a thump. His breathing turned fast, too fast. I wiped my hands and walked to his room. He was kneeling by the bed, tearing through his duffel like it had betrayed him. Clothes flung everywhere, his back rising and falling like he'd run a mile. It's gone, he said, voice cracked. The picture. I had it right here. His hands tore at his hair, then the bag again. I knelt beside him. Let's look. Start simple. He didn't answer, just kept ripping zippers open like hope hid inside. We checked the desk, the closet, under the heater. His face turned pale, fingers twitchy, like something would break if he didn't hold it soon. I lifted the mattress and saw a corner wedged by the wall. I pulled it free. Got it. He snatched it like I'd saved a person, pressed it to his chest, turned away. I thought I lost her, he whispered. His voice dropped like a stone. I stayed silent, hands still on the bed frame, watching his shoulders shake once then go still. That night he sat on the floor, legs crossed, Biscuit beside him, photo in hand. He didn't look at me when he spoke, just stared at the rug. She used to sing in the car, he said. Not good. Just loud. She made pancakes shaped like stars. She smelled like vanilla lotion, the kind in the brown bottle. That was all. I didn't ask for more. You offer what you can. Nobody gets to demand the rest. Weeks settled into rhythm. I left for work at 7, he was always up, already eating cereal, pretending to read. He followed rules without being asked. Shoes by the rack. Thermostat untouched. Door locked. Structure burned into his bones. After school, I'd find him reading bricks of books. Space, history, war. Always non-fiction. Never asked for help, never hovered. Dinner was steady silence. A truce. Sometimes he set the table before I came home. 2 plates, 2 glasses, nothing fancy, just a test. I said thanks. He shrugged. Another night, laundry folded, shirt square, state style. I opened my drawer and knew. We weren't family yet. Not close. Not even warm. But not strangers either. Biscuit had no hesitation, she chose him outright. One evening I saw her with her head on his leg while he read aviation disasters. Her tail thumped when I entered. His eyes didn't move from the page. You like dogs? I asked. She's not like other dogs, he said. How so? I asked. She doesn't pretend to need more than she does. Some lines don't need replies. Then came the call. 10 p.m., still logged into city systems, phone buzzed. Assistant Principal Larkin, flat voice, there's been an incident. We need you to come in. At the school, Kellen sat on a bench outside the office. Knuckles red, hoodie sleeve pushed back, eyes blank but not empty. Larkin, tie neat, words scripted, folders like props. 3-day suspension, he said, and a behavioral contract. I asked, what happened? He sighed like I was difficult. There was a comment. Another student, Trevor Pritchard, said something offensive. I pressed. What was the comment? He avoided, but finally admitted, a joke about his book. About visiting his mom at the psych ward. I turned to Trevor, pale, hiding in his jacket. You said that? He mumbled, just a joke. I snapped, you think that makes it better? He whispered, I didn't mean anything. I said, that's the problem. Larkin tried to redirect. I stared him down. Kellen sat silent through it all, eyes locked on the carpet like he wanted it to swallow him. We signed forms, walked out in silence. In the car, freeway lights passing, he finally said, it won't matter. You'll send me back. My hands gripped the wheels so tight my jaw ached. At home, Biscuit barked once like she was counting us. I cut the engine, turned to him. Look at me. He didn't. Look at me. Slowly, painfully, he did. I told him, I'm not sending you anywhere. You threw a punch. You'll deal with it. But you live here. Got it? His throat bobbed, eyes glassy. He whispered, it's always the joke. The move. The cycle. Test, react, pack, move. I said, you stay. We do the suspension. We fix what we can. And if you still want this come spring, we talk adoption for real. I hadn't planned it. It just came out, solid, no hesitation. His body shifted like pressure released. Not a smile, not thanks. Just lighter, like the floor might hold. You mean it? He asked. I said, I mean it. That was the moment something cracked open. 3 quiet days followed. He read 2 books, made a rubbery omelet I ate whole without critique. At school, I met with Larkin and the counselor, pushed for reflection journals instead of punishment. Kellen agreed. On his first day back, he stood by the door, backpack ready. I want you to hold it, he said. The photo. Just for today. He handed it to me, fragile, fingers lingering. I tucked it inside my jacket. Biscuit barked. We drove off. And in that moment, as the wind rattled the windows and the boys sat steady in the passenger seat, I realized this was no longer about temporary guardianship. This was the start of something that would test both of us in ways we hadn't even imagined yet, and if you think you know how it ends, you're wrong because this is just the beginning. The days after that ride felt like stepping into uncharted ground where every sound, every silence, and every small gesture carried a weight we both felt but didn't name, and I noticed how Kellen's movements inside the house slowly shifted from cautious to measured, like he was allowing the walls to hold his presence rather than bouncing him back out, and I tried not to stare too much but I caught myself memorizing the way he lingered at the kitchen counter when pouring cereal, or the way Biscuit always leaned against him like a second shadow, her head brushing his knee whenever he stopped moving, and it was Biscuit who became the first sign of calm, the animal that knew before either of us that he wasn't just a temporary guest, because she didn't wait outside his door anymore, she slept on the rug. Inside, curled in a circle with her nose tucked into her paws, and when I opened the door one morning to call him for school she raised her head with sleepy eyes like she was saying this is our place now, not just yours. At school, the fallout from the fight lingered in whispers more than shouts, kids nudging each other when Kellen walked by, teachers glancing with tight lips as if they knew more than they admitted, and Trevor Pritchard avoided him altogether, which I thought was for the best, though I kept a close watch because I'd learned early that silence often hides more sharpness than words. Kellen didn't talk about it, didn't mention the fight, the suspension, or the whispers. He just carried his books tighter against his chest and read them like shields, heavy volumes of history and science that made him look like he was hauling around pieces of another world. At home, our rhythm deepened in small ways that mattered more than big declarations. One evening I came back late from work, traffic lights and code reviews still buzzing in my head, and found the table set again, not perfectly, but with intention, 2 plates, silverware lined crookedly, glasses already filled with water, and he was sitting on the couch reading, pretending not to notice my reaction. I said, "You didn't have to," and he shrugged, eyes still on the book, but his ears turned red, and that was enough to tell me he cared. Another night he started making his own eggs, scrambled in a pan too hot so they stuck in clumps, but he scraped them onto a plate, handed it over like an experiment, and waited for my judgment. I ate them without comment and washed the plate afterward, and the way his shoulders loosened told me he was cataloging every response for future use, like data points in an experiment on trust. Biscuit, of course, made it easier, because she pulled us into the same spaces, living room, porch, backyard, like a silent referee who decided when it was time for proximity and when it was time for retreat. She had a way of dropping her ball near my feet, waiting for me to throw it, then carrying it back to Kellen instead, as if she was forcing us into the same loop, making sure neither of us stayed out too long. The real shift came when my brother Miles decided to show up, not uninvited but unannounced, carrying bagels in a warm paper sack and his laptop slung under his arm, his voice casual but his eyes sharp as they scanned the boy across from him. Kellen looked at him with that same careful gaze he had given every adult before, measured, weighing, waiting to see if this one would exit as quickly as the others. Miles, being Miles, didn't push. He placed a cinnamon raisin bagel in front of Kellen like an offering, opened his laptop, and started working at the table as if he had always belonged there. After a few minutes, he asked, "You mind if I look at the photo?" And that was when I saw the true test. Kellen's hand went to his pocket, hesitated, then pulled out the creased picture of his mother, unfolded it with careful fingers, and slid it across the table. Miles held it up to the light and noticed what I hadn't, the faint neon glow of a sign half hidden in the background. "Atlas Loans," he said, tapping the faded corner. Only one location had that globe logo. Ravenel Avenue. My chest tightened because suddenly this wasn't just a faded memory, it was a place, a block, a trace of a life once lived. Miles texted an old outreach worker named Devin, and within 10 minutes the phone rang back with words that pulled the air heavier in the room. Yes, a young mother with mental health struggles, yes, a boy who loved dinosaurs, yes, she came and went, then vanished. Devin said her name might have been Elise. Kellen didn't speak through any of this. He just sat frozen, eyes locked on the photograph like it might sprout more answers if he stared hard enough. When I finally called Janelle, she didn't even ask how I found the lead, she simply said she'd connect us to Darlene, who ran supported living homes nearby. That was the night Kellen walked into the living room without slamming a door or raising his voice, holding the photo in one hand, biscuit pressed to his side, and said 4 words that carried more certainty than anything before: "If she's there, we go." I nodded. We go. No hesitation. Meeting Darlene was like walking into a room where the air had been cleared of pretense. Her office was plain, her words steady, her eyes sharp without being cruel. She met Kellen first, alone, and I sat in the lobby listening to the hum of a vending machine, feeling the strange weight of not knowing what he was saying behind closed doors. When they returned, he looked taller, not in inches but in presence, like he had inhaled something steadier than fear. Then Darlene pulled out the notebook. A spiral bound, worn at the edges, with thick black markers scrawled across the front, "For my boy." She said staff usually threw out forgotten items, But this one had been saved, maybe because it felt heavier than trash. Kellen took it with both hands, didn't open it at first, just held it like it might dissolve. When he finally flipped the pages, his lips moved slightly, whispering words I couldn't hear, and then he looked up and said, steady but quiet, "She remembered me." I didn't reply. That moment belonged to him alone.
From there, everything moved toward the visit. Darlene suggested starting in the garden, open air, less pressure, fewer walls. On the appointed Saturday we drove in silence, Kellen clutching the notebook like it contained his oxygen, knees bouncing every few seconds. I didn't push words into the silence because I knew it was the only thing holding him together. When we walked through the mulch path, I saw her before he did. Elise, by the rosemary bush, hands twisting over each other like she was folding paper that wouldn't crease. Her hair shorter now, streaked with gray, her posture smaller but not broken. When she saw him, her eyes blinked once and then the name fell from her lips like it had been stored all these years, Kellen. He froze. She stepped forward slowly, raised her hand, and brushed 2 fingers against his cheek as if touching the air itself. "I wrote to you," she whispered. I didn't know where to send it. He didn't answer. Instead, he pulled out the notebook, placed it in her hands, and let her see the proof that she hadn't been forgotten, not by him, not by the world. We visited again, and again, each time like building with fragile glass, each time ending before the weight broke it. She gave him a paper flower once, bent stem, faded marker petals, and he tucked it between notebook pages like it was gold. On the 4th visit, he let her hold his hand. That was when Janelle arrived with the adoption packet, thick papers clipped together with bureaucratic precision. "If you're sure," she said, looking at me, but Kellen spoke before I could. "I'm sure." His voice didn't shake. We scheduled the hearing. He chose a thrift store blazer and a tie patterned with tiny planets, Saturn bright in the center, and when the gavel came down, the sound echoed like a door shutting out years of drift. He walked out into sunlight with me, Elise, and Darlene, and ordered star-shaped pancakes at a diner, laughing when the cook returned with a lopsided version cut freehand. "It's perfect," he said, and Elise watched him chew like she was memorizing each bite. But if you think adoption is a clean ending, you don't know how life works. Because not long after that, the whispers started again. This time not from children but adults hiding behind neighborhood apps, typing words about safety and stigma, hinting that a boy with a mother in a mental health facility couldn't belong in their community. One post was anonymous. Another, less careful, came from Trevor's father himself, a photo of the school awards with Elise blurred in the corner, captioned with venom disguised as wit. I printed it and walked it straight into the principal's office. I spoke at the school board, voice steady, reminding them that my son had done the work, taken the hits, written the words, earned the scholarship, while adults still mocked him for bloodlines he never chose. Miles followed with his own words. Darlene too. The room shifted. Within days, the PTA officer resigned. Policies changed. The cracks in the wall widened just enough for light to pour through. But Kellen didn't want to talk about it. He sat on the porch tossing biscuits ball, his face unreadable. "You don't have to say anything," I told him. "I just want you to know we didn't let it slide." He caught the ball, rolled it between his palms, and asked one thing, "You spoke up?" I said yes. "For her, too?" "Yes. For both of you." He nodded once. "Good. About time." Summer arrived heavy, inconsistent, like a window unit with a broken dial. Elise had good days and bad, some visits filled with smiles and stories, others marked by exhaustion and stares at shadows only she could see. Kellen took each one in silence, cataloging them like he did everything else. One night he found a letter hidden in the back of the notebook, written years earlier, addressed to the boy who loves rockets. It spoke of the moon, of windows, of trying. He read it quietly, then handed it to me, saying only, "She kept trying." He believed it. That was enough. By August he was volunteering at the library, shelving non-fiction with steady hands, memorizing the titles people borrowed, guessing their lives from the books they chose. He told me about a woman allergic to bees who checked out a beekeeping manual, saying she liked to read things that scared her. He said, "You get that?" And I said, "I do now." Slowly, the boy who once spoke in whispers started offering pieces of himself without being asked, and each piece felt like a door unlocked. And yet, beneath it all, the story was still building, pressure still tightening, because this was not the conclusion, not even close. It was only another threshold, another beginning, and the real test, the hardest one, was waiting just around the corner, and it began in the most ordinary way, with a knock at the door one Wednesday evening while Kellen was sitting at the table working through a thick book on space travel, his pencil balanced on the edge of the page like he might underline something if he trusted the sentence enough, and Biscuit perked her ears before I even stood up, tail swishing nervously, as if she knew before I did that this knock wasn't just another neighbor borrowing sugar or a delivery left on the wrong porch, and when I opened it, I found Janelle standing there with a look that told me she wasn't here for paperwork this time. She was here because the ground had shifted again, because the fragile balance we'd built was about to be tested in ways I hadn't even dared to imagine. She stepped in without asking, eyes scanning the room, settling on Kellen for a half second, softening, then hardening again as she turned back to me. "We've had a development," she said, her voice calm but her hands clasped too tightly. She explained that Elisa's facility had been flagged in a report, not for abuse or neglect, but for budget cuts that meant transfers were coming. Some residents would be relocated, maybe shuffled across the state. For most families it was an inconvenience. For us, it was a storm about to hit. Kellen didn't speak, didn't even lift his head, but I saw his pencil snap quietly between his fingers, the clean break of graphite filling the silence with weight. That night was different. He didn't retreat to his room like usual. He sat on the porch with Biscuit curled against his side and stared at the dark street, whispering under his breath words too soft for me to catch, and I stood inside the screen door watching him, wondering if I should interrupt or let him fight his ghosts alone. Finally, he said loud enough for me to hear, "She's going to disappear again." His voice didn't shake, it didn't rise, it just dropped into the night like a stone. I stepped outside and sat next to him. "We don't know that," I said, but even as I said it, I knew he wasn't asking for reassurances. He was stating a fact as he saw it, a fact carved into him from years of movement and loss. "If she goes," he said, eyes still on the street, "I go too." The words cut sharper than any fight or silence before. My chest tightened but I forced my voice steady. "You live here. That doesn't change. Transfers don't erase what we've built." He shook his head, jaw set, and muttered, "You don't get it. If she's lost, I'm lost." Over the next week, paperwork flew like dust in a storm. Meetings with administrators, phone calls with lawyers, whispers between staff about which facility would shut its doors. Darlene fought harder than anyone, her voice steady in rooms full of men who wanted to shuffle files rather than lives. She called me late one night, exhaustion lacing her words, and said, "If the transfer goes through, visitation will be harder. Longer drives. More red tape. It doesn't mean it ends, but it means it changes." I thanked her, hung up, and sat at the kitchen table staring at the adoption papers I still had tucked in a drawer, wondering how a signature could feel both permanent and fragile in the same breath. Kellen grew quieter, which I hadn't thought possible. He read until midnight, slept with the notebook under his pillow, and avoided school conversations entirely. But silence doesn't mean stillness. It means pressure. And pressure, I knew, eventually cracks. The crack came in the form of another incident at school, not a fight this time, but something quieter and sharper. A teacher found him sketching during class, not equations or doodles, but detailed plans of escape routes, maps of the city with arrows pointing out, calculations of bus schedules and distances. They called me in, papers spread across the desk like evidence. "He's planning something," the counselor said, concern laced with judgment. I didn't scold him. I didn't accuse. I just gathered the papers, folded them, and put them in my bag. On the drive home, he stared out the window, face blank. I said, "You think I won't notice if you leave?" He didn't answer. I added, "You don't have to draw exits here. You already belong." His jaw twitched, but he stayed silent, and I let the silence ride all the way home because sometimes the words that stick aren't the ones you force but the ones you leave hanging in the air.
2 days later, Elise had a bad episode during a visit. We were in the garden, the same place where they first reconnected, when a loud car backfired on the street. She froze, eyes wide, hands shaking, and then she muttered fragments of words about being followed, about watchers, about needing to hide. Kellen reached for her hand, but she pulled away, backing into the rosemary bush, her breath fast and sharp. Staff moved in, gentle but firm, guiding her back inside. Kellen stood frozen, his face empty but his fists clenched. When we got home, he slammed his door for the first time in weeks. Biscuit whined outside until he finally opened it, and I watched her slip inside like she was carrying more wisdom than either of us. That night, I heard him whispering again, not to me but to the notebook, reading old entries out loud like spells, like he was trying to anchor himself to words written years ago by hands that had been unsteady but still tried. The hardest part wasn't Elisa's condition. It was the cruelty of others who saw weakness as entertainment. Another anonymous post appeared online, this one more vicious, claiming our family was unsafe, claiming I was reckless for bringing a boy with that kind of bloodline into my home. This time it spread faster, screenshots jumping from one neighbor's phone to another. I knew who wrote it. The phrasing was too familiar. Trevor's father again, this time careful but not careful enough. Miles urged me to let it go. Darlene urged me to protect. I chose both. I filed official complaints, handed over evidence, and at the same time I sat Kellen down and showed him what had been written. His eyes scanned the words once, twice, then he looked at me with a stare so sharp it felt like a mirror. "They're not talking about me," he said. "They're talking about her." I nodded. "Yes. And they're wrong about both of you." He didn't reply, but for the first time, he didn't look like he wanted to run. He looked like he wanted to fight, not with fists, but with proof of his place. That proof came sooner than I expected. His school announced a community event, students reading essays on belonging and resilience. When the counselor suggested Kellen read his scholarship piece, he resisted at first, muttering that it felt like being dissected. But 2 nights before the event, I found him practicing under his breath, pacing his room with the paper folded in his hand, Biscuit watching like an audience of one. On the day, he stood behind the microphone in that thrift store blazer, tugged once at the sleeves, and began to read. His voice didn't shake. It didn't rush. It carried each word like it had already been tested in fire. "Home is the place that keeps your shape even when you're not in it," he said, and when the applause came, it wasn't polite. It was real. Elise sat near the back with Darlene, her hands folded, her jacket buttoned wrong again, but this time she smiled as he spoke. When he stepped down, I clapped. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just steady, long enough for him to hear. But even victories carry shadows. The next morning, an envelope arrived in our mailbox. No return address. Inside was a photo of Elise at the facility, taken without permission, grainy and cruel, with the words written in block letters, "She will never be normal." I stared at it for a long time, anger boiling, but when I turned, I saw Kellen in the doorway. He'd read it too. His face didn't change. He just said, "They're wrong," and walked away. Later, I found the photo ripped in half and stuffed at the bottom of the trash, covered in coffee grounds. That small act felt louder than any speech. Still, the hardest test hadn't yet arrived. Because the facility announced officially that Elise would be transferred within the month, and the new location was 3 hours away. Visits would be harder, unpredictable, fewer. Kellen didn't explode. He didn't cry. He just folded into silence again, but this silence felt different. It wasn't retreat. It was planning. I found his notebook on the kitchen table one night, not Elisa's but his own, filled with sketches and words I hadn't seen before. Plans for the future. Drawings of a house with a porch. Lists of books he wanted to read. And at the bottom of one page, in small block letters, "I don't leave this time." I closed it gently, placed it back where I'd found it, and felt something heavy shift inside me, something like hope but steadier. When the day of the transfer came, we drove with him to the new facility, the notebook clutched in his hands, the photo of Elise still tucked inside. The building was newer, cleaner, brighter, but that didn't matter. What mattered was the look on Elisa's face when she saw him walk in, steady, unshaken, carrying proof that he wasn't going anywhere. She touched his cheek again, whispered his name, and this time, he answered with no hesitation, "I'm here." And as I stood in the corner watching, I realized the hardest test wasn't about where Elise lived, or how others judged, or even about the system stacked against us. The hardest test was whether Kellen believed he could stay rooted when the ground around him kept shifting. And as I looked at him standing there, shoulders squared, notebook in hand, I knew the answer wasn't complete yet. Because this test was still unfolding, and the choices ahead would decide whether he finally stopped bracing for the floor to drop, or whether the past would pull him back under. And if you think you know which way he'll lean, you might be surprised, because the story is far from over. The story is far from over, because just when I thought the ground beneath us had steadied, the cracks widened again, not in ways loud or explosive, but in the quiet, creeping ways that spread under doors and through whispers, the kind that test you in silence before they roar in daylight. And it began when the facility called late one evening, Darlene's voice calm but taut as a stretched rope, telling me that Elise had wandered outside during a fire drill, that she hadn't run, hadn't shouted, but simply walked past the staff and stood at the edge of the parking lot staring at the sky like she expected it to answer her, and though they guided her back safely, the incident meant her medication would shift again, more supervision, fewer freedoms, and as Darlene spoke I could hear the unspoken message, progress comes and goes, and some days you win only by standing still. I thanked her, hung up, and turned to see Kellen standing in the kitchen doorway, biscuit at his feet, his face pale in the yellow light. "She doesn't belong in there," he said flatly. I tried to explain the protocols, the reasons, the risks, but he shook his head, jaw set, eyes burning in that quiet way of his. "She belongs here," he whispered, and though his voice was soft, it landed in the room like a challenge. The days after grew heavier. Kellen became restless in ways I hadn't seen before. He still went to school, still volunteered at the library, still read his heavy books, but his focus fractured. He would start a page, then stare out the window. He would shelve books, then lose himself in the spines like he was searching for an answer hidden between titles. At night, I heard his steps pacing the floor above my room, slow, deliberate, never frantic, like he was walking the perimeter of his own cage. Biscuit followed him, nails tapping the hardwood, her steady rhythm the only sign he wasn't unraveling entirely. I tried to talk, but words slid off him. "You okay?" earned a shrug. "Want to play cards?" drew silence. The only time he softened was when Elise visited under the new restrictions, shorter sessions, staff hovering closer. She tried. She smiled when she could, asked him about his books, hummed the songs she half remembered. But the gaps showed. Sometimes she lost her place mid-sentence. Sometimes she looked past him like the fog in her mind had pulled her somewhere else. Each time, I saw him clutch the notebook tighter, like he could tether her to the pages if he just held on hard enough. Then came the night I found him gone. It was 2 a.m, the house silent, Biscuit whining by the door. His shoes missing, his jacket gone. My chest clenched with a fear I hadn't felt in years. I drove the streets, headlights sweeping empty sidewalks, and after 40 minutes I found him 3 blocks away, sitting on the curb outside the library, the notebook open on his lap, pages fluttering in the wind. I parked, stepped out, and sat beside him without speaking. Finally, he said, "I thought if I sat here long enough, she'd walk past, like she used to." I told him gently, "She doesn't live here anymore." He didn't look up. "Neither do I," he muttered. My throat tightened, but I forced my voice steady. "You live with me. You live with Biscuit. You live where you're wanted." He shook his head, eyes wet but not spilling, and whispered, "Wanted doesn't last." Those 3 words carved me open because I knew exactly where they came from: every foster home, every placement, every silent exit that had taught him permanence was a lie. I didn't argue. I just stayed until his breathing slowed, then walked him home, the notebook tucked safely under his arm like a lifeline. After that, I realized we needed something more, something beyond routines and reassurances. So I called Miles. He came over that weekend with his calm voice and sharper insight, sitting across from Kellen at the kitchen table, asking questions that weren't questions at all, like, "What do you do when the sky feels too heavy?" and "What helps when the noise won't stop?" Kellen didn't answer directly, but his fingers tapped the notebook, his eyes flicked toward Biscuit, and Miles nodded as if that was answer enough. Later, Miles told me quietly, "He's not breaking. He's bracing. There's a difference. But bracing too long wears you down." I carried that line with me for weeks. The pressure built again at school. Trevor, emboldened by his father's online venom, muttered another comment within earshot, not a direct taunt but a sneer dressed as a joke. Kellen didn't hit this time. He didn't shout. He simply closed his book, stood, and walked out of class. The teacher called me, frustration spilling over the phone, saying he couldn't just leave whenever he wanted. I drove over, found him sitting on the front steps, Biscuit's leash looped in his hands even though she wasn't there. "You walked away," I said, sitting beside him. He shrugged. "If I swing, I lose. If I sit, I drown. Walking's all that's left." I didn't correct him. I didn't punish. I just drove him home, and later that night, I wrote a letter to the school board reminding them that resilience doesn't always look like compliance. But even resilience has its limits, and his came the day Elise was scheduled for her first extended weekend visit outside the facility. We prepared carefully. Pancake mix bought. Syrup ready. Vanilla lotion on the counter like a quiet welcome. She arrived with Darlene, hair braided, hands steady, eyes clearer than I'd seen in months. For the first few hours it was almost ordinary, cooking, eating, Biscuit sprawled across both their feet. But by evening, the cracks showed. She grew restless, eyes darting, muttering about lights too bright, sounds too sharp. Kellen noticed first, his body tensing, his jaw clenching. I tried to distract her, offered tea, music, anything. But she spiraled, her words fracturing, her hands shaking. Finally, she shouted, just once, loud enough to shatter the air, before collapsing into tears. Kellen froze. His face emptied. He stood, walked upstairs, and slammed his door. I sat with Elise until Darlene guided her out, promising it was a setback, not an end. But the house felt hollow after they left, as if the walls themselves had absorbed the echo. For days, Kellen wouldn't speak. Not to me, not to Miles, not even to Biscuit, though she refused to leave his side. I found him one night in his room, the old photo of Elise on the desk beside the new one, his eyes darting between them like he was trying to reconcile two worlds. "Which one is real?" he asked finally, his voice cracking. I swallowed hard. "Both," I said. "She's the woman who made star pancakes and the woman who forgets where she is. She's both. And she's yours either way." He didn't respond, but he didn't throw the photos away. He taped them back on the bookshelf, side by side, proof that contradictions can coexist. Then the letter arrived, not anonymous this time, but official, family court, a petition from distant relatives of Elise claiming custody rights now that she was in long-term care. People who hadn't shown up in years suddenly wanted a stake, maybe out of guilt, maybe out of greed, maybe just to stir chaos. My stomach sank as I read the words, because I knew battles in court were colder than battles in classrooms, and Kellen, already bracing against every storm, would see this as betrayal all over again. When I told him, his face didn't move, but his hands curled into fists. "They don't know me," he said. "They don't get to take me." I promised him they wouldn't, but inside, I wasn't sure. The weeks leading up to the hearing were a blur of paperwork, affidavits, meetings with lawyers. Darlene testified. Miles wrote statements. Teachers submitted notes. Through it all, Kellen stayed quieter than ever, but I could see the storm in his eyes. On the morning of the hearing, he wore the same blazer, the planet tie, his shoulders squared as if he was marching into battle. In the courtroom, the relatives spoke first, their words hollow, rehearsed, painting themselves as saviors. When it was our turn, I spoke plainly, "He is my son. Not by blood, but by choice. And choice is stronger." Kellen stood, voice steady, and said only, "I'm not moving again." The judge paused, looked at him, then at us, then struck the gavel. Petition denied. The sound rang like thunder rolling away. Relief flooded, but it was short-lived. Because as we walked out, Kellen whispered, "What's next?" Not as a question. As a warning. He had learned that peace was temporary, and he was bracing already for the next storm. And as much as I wanted to promise him safety forever, I knew the world didn't work that way. I could only promise one thing. "We face it together," I said. He nodded once, but his eyes stayed sharp, searching the horizon. And that horizon was darker than I realized, because waiting just beyond the courthouse steps was a new shadow, one I didn't notice at first because it blended so easily into the crowd of people streaming out with papers in hand and murmurs about other cases, but Kellen noticed, his eyes flicking toward the man leaning against a car across the street, arms folded, stare locked on us with an intensity that felt heavier than casual interest, and it wasn't until we crossed the sidewalk that he stepped forward and introduced himself as someone from Elisa's past, a name I barely recognized from the old files, a half-brother or cousin who had disappeared years ago and now returned with words that carried more venom than care, saying things like, "She never should have had him," and "You think one piece of paper makes him yours?" Kellen stiffened at my side, fists tightening, and I put a hand on his shoulder, steering him toward the car without engaging, but the man's voice followed us down the street like a hook, sharp and deliberate, designed to leave a mark. We drove home in silence, Kellen staring out the window, jaw clenched, Biscuit whining in the back seat as if she too felt the weight of what had just been thrown at us. The days after that encounter felt like moving through fog, the kind where every shape looks like a threat and every sound carries more meaning than it should. Kellen didn't ask about the man, didn't mention his words, but I caught him late at night with the notebook open, tracing the letters, "For my boy," again and again like he was trying to remind himself who he belonged to. He grew sharper at school, not violent, but cutting, refusing to let teachers' comments slide, pushing back against every slight, big or small. When I asked him once if he wanted to talk, he shook his head. "Talking doesn't change what people see," he said, voice low. I didn't argue. I just stayed close, making sure the fridge was stocked, the lights were steady, and Biscuit was always nearby. Elisa's condition wavered again, up and down, good days like soft sunlight, bad days like broken glass. During visits she sometimes held herself together long enough to ask Kellen about his books, his volunteer work, his favorite meals. Other times she drifted mid-sentence, eyes clouding, words dissolving into mutters about strangers at the window or shadows in the hall. Kellen took it all in with the same silence he always carried, but I saw the way his knuckles whitened when she faltered, the way he pressed the notebook against his chest afterward as if trying to hold the pieces in place. Darlene guided us through each visit, calm and steady, reminding both of us that progress isn't a straight line. But Kellen wanted straight lines. He wanted certainty. And certainty was the one thing the world refused to give him. Then came the night the window shattered. It was late, rain tapping the roof, thunder distant but steady, and I woke to the sound of glass breaking downstairs. I grabbed a flashlight, heart pounding, and found the living room window smashed, shards glittering on the floor like teeth. Nothing was stolen. Nothing touched. Just a stone lying in the middle of the rug with a note wrapped around it. I unrolled it with shaking hands and read the words scrawled in block letters, "He doesn't belong." Kellen appeared in the doorway, barefoot, eyes wide but not surprised. He looked at the stone, then at me, and said, "It's them." I didn't ask who. I didn't need to. I cleaned up the glass, called the police, filed the report that would probably gather dust, and watched as Kellen picked up the stone, turned it over in his hands, and set it on his nightstand beside the photo and the notebook, as if daring the world to throw another. The following weeks were a test of endurance. Letters appeared in the mailbox with no return address. Notes slipped under the door at school. Words like crazy, danger, broken. Each one sharper than the last. Each one aimed not at me but at him, at his bloodline, at the part of him tied to Elise. I wanted to shield him, to burn the notes before he saw them, but he found them anyway, and instead of crumbling, he taped them to the inside of his closet door, covering the wood with every cruel word, building a wall of hate he faced each morning when he dressed. When I asked why, he said, "If I see it first, it can't surprise me." My throat tightened, but I didn't argue, because I knew he was fighting the only way he knew how. Miles stepped in more during that time, visiting weekly, sitting with Kellen over bagels and books, asking questions that weren't really questions but lifelines. What scares you less today? What feels steady right now? Slowly, Kellen began to answer in fragments. Biscuit. Reading. Not moving. Each answer small, but each one proof he hadn't given up. Darlene kept us grounded, reminding me that resilience is built in inches, not miles. And Elise, in her rare clear moments, spoke words that cut through the noise. During one visit she held Kellen's hand and whispered, "You're not broken. You're built different. That's strength." He didn't reply, but I saw the way he gripped her hand tighter, the way his shoulders eased just enough to let the words sink in. Then came the night everything cracked open. It was a community event at the school, a fundraiser with booths and banners, families milling about, kids laughing too loudly. I volunteered at the IT table, explaining programs to bored parents, while Kellen wandered the aisles with Biscuit on a leash. For a while it felt almost normal. But then I saw him freeze, body rigid, eyes locked across the gym. The man from the courthouse. Elisa's relative. He was there, standing near the exit, smirking like he owned the room. Before I could move, Kellen dropped Biscuit's leash and strode across the floor. People parted, whispers rising, and I pushed through the crowd just as he reached the man. "Why are you here?" Kellen demanded, voice sharp but steady. The man sneered. "To remind you where you come from." My stomach nodded, fearing fists, fearing chaos, but Kellen didn't swing. He didn't shout. He pulled the notebook from his jacket, opened it, and shoved it against the man's chest. "This is where I come from," he said, voice clear enough to echo. "From someone who tried. From someone who wrote my name when nobody else did." The man froze, eyes flicking to the words, and for a moment the smirk faltered. Security stepped in, escorted him out, and the crowd buzzed with whispers. Kellen bent down, picked up Biscuit's leash, and walked back to me without a word. That night, sitting on the porch with the cool air pressing in, I asked him if he was okay. He shrugged. I didn't hit him. I nodded. You didn't need to. You already won. He didn't smile, but his jaw loosened, and he leaned back against the railing, Biscuit's head on his lap, the notebook still clutched in his hands. For the first time, I saw not just the boy bracing against storms but the young man learning to stand in them without breaking. Months passed. The whispers faded. The notes stopped. The man vanished again. Elise remained where she was, steady some days, fragile others, but always present in Kellen's life through letters, visits, and the notebook that had become less a relic and more a bridge. Kellen kept growing, taller, steadier, more rooted. He still read heavy books, still folded his laundry in neat squares, still carried shadows in his eyes, but he also laughed sometimes, real laughs that caught me off guard, and he began to plan, not escapes, not exits, but futures. College brochures on the table. Volunteer work turning into paid hours at the library. Essays submitted to contests he once would have scoffed at. One evening, as the sun set and the house settled into that quiet that means everyone is where they belong, Kellen taped a new photo on his bookshelf. Not the old grainy one, not the blurred courtroom snapshot, but a fresh print of him, Elise, and Biscuit in the garden, sunlight spilling over their shoulders, smiles soft but real. He stood back, looked at it, and said simply, "It's enough." I didn't ask what he meant. I didn't need to. Because in that moment, I understood. The fight wasn't about erasing the past or proving worth to anyone else. It was about building a place that kept his shape, even when the world tried to bend it. And now, as I sit here telling you this, I know the story doesn't end, not really. Life doesn't tie itself in bows. There will be more storms, more whispers, more shadows waiting around corners. But there will also be more mornings with pancakes, more nights with books, more days when Biscuit's tail thumps steady against the floor. And that's enough. Because he stayed. Because we stayed. Because sometimes the bravest thing you can do is refuse to run. So if you've listened this far, tell me, if you were in my shoes, would you have taken the risk? Would you have opened your door to a boy with one duffel and a photo, not knowing if the ground would ever steady? Share your thoughts in the comments, because your words matter more than you think. And if this story meant something to you, please hit like and subscribe. It's one click for you, but it's a lifeline for us, helping keep these stories alive. YouTube has picked another video for you on the screen, tap it and let's see if they guessed right.